A horseback ride set off from Nebraska yesterday, honoring a group of Dakota who were exiled from their homes in the heat of the U.S. Dakota War. Aaron Stuvey has their story.
In 1862, in the fallout of the U.S. Dakota War, an estimated 1,700 Dakota people were taken to an internment camp at Fort Snelling. The conditions were tough, and between 1 and 300 died from starvation or disease. The next year, the surviving Dakota were loaded onto steamboats and transported to the Crow Creek Reservation in South Dakota, where many more suffered and died. Today, the memory of those people, now known as the Dakota Exiles, lives on with a memorial ride, similar to the Dakota 38+2 or reconciliation rides, but specifically meant to tell the story of those exiled Dakota. Sunday, the ride began in Santee, Nebraska, and will ride 290 miles to Mankato, landing alongside the reconciliation riders and Fort Snelling runners at the downtown memorial site the day after Christmas. This group, rather than relying on lodging, camp out on their own, setting up teepees in parks or wherever they can take a break. The ride also shines a spotlight on substance abuse and suicide that is far too common in Indigenous peoples. The group is resolved to having a completely clean ride. In their words, no drinking, no drugs, only prayer. Aaron Stuvey, KUIC News Now.